On today's episode, Angela's PHT success story. Welcome to the podcast helping you overcome your proximal hamstring tendinopathy. This podcast is designed to help you understand this condition, learn the most effective evidence-based treatments, and of course, bust the widespread misconceptions. My name is Brodie Sharpe. I'm an online physiotherapist, recreational athlete, creator of the Run Smarter series, and a chronic proximal hamstring tendinopathy battler. Whether you are an athlete or not, this podcast will educate and empower you in taking the right steps to overcome this horrible condition. So let's give you the right knowledge along with practical takeaways in today's lesson. Get ready for a few more success stories. I think I've got a fair few lined up at the moment. If all goes well and all the recordings and the scheduling that I have, probably expect another 4 or 5 success stories in the next 10 episodes. So you all are requesting them, and yeah, more than happy to deliver and spread some positivity. Now we have Angela on this episode. I worked with Angela and had discharged her. She was doing really well towards the end of the year in 2022. And then I received an email from Angela about her update. And so let me read it out for you now. Dear Brodie, I wanted to thank you and tell you how instrumental you were to me reaching my goals. When I started working with you in the fall, I said that my goal was to PR the Boston Marathon. It seemed like a stretch given that I was totally terrified of speed work at that point. Well, I kept up with my rehab, and since then, always asking myself, what would Brodie say about this progression? And I went back to listening to all of your old podcast episodes to come up with a plan when my injury flared up a few weeks ago. I am so happy to say that I did it. I got a 2-minute PR on a tough hilly course in Boston. The PHT was the least of my worries throughout. In brackets, now the calf cramping and shredded quads, on the other hand, ... You helped me realize that recovery was possible when all other PTs were just telling me not to run. I'm so grateful to you for empowering me to make real progress. I wouldn't say I'm 100% healed, but I no longer feel like it is a limitation. Thank you so much. All the best, Angela. In response to that, I reached out and said, congratulations, Angela. What sort of lessons have you learned? What sort of insights have you found to be beneficial? She's come up with a list of 6 things. And so she's going to jump onto the podcast. We're going to discuss all of those and dive into a bit more detail for each sort of topic. And it's going to end up being a very inspirational yet practical success story. Angela, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Let's dive in. We're doing it slightly different with these success stories, how instead of going through, from start to end of this journey, we've sort of talked back and forth about some of your insights throughout your journey. But before we go into that, let's briefly cover an intro, sort of who you are, like your running history, and also on top of that, like what sort of major injuries you've had prior to this one.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. I was never really an athlete, like in school and whatnot, but I always kind of liked running. I always kind of gravitated towards it as my kind of like cardio. So I think for a long time, I would do like 3 miles on the treadmill in 30 minutes. And that was like kind of my max. And I was happy with that. And then about 5 years ago, I started a PhD program, and I suddenly found myself not only with more like flexibility in my time, but also like newfound like anxieties and stresses in life. And I also happened to move to Chicago, and I was just a few blocks from the Lake Michigan lakefront. There's this beautiful trail. And so, yeah, over time, over the course of a year or so, I just really ramped up. I was running a lot. I used it as a chance to listen to podcasts and audiobooks and like really get in that state of flow, really being able to kind of be in the moment. And really, I just developed a love for running. it was all solo. I wasn't doing races. But then, like it starts to creep up like, oh, maybe I'll just like hop in one of these races, see what it's like to run with other people. So I did a 10K. I had a great time. Did a half marathon, and that one, it was like, wow, adrenaline. Like it's just, you can get competitive with yourself and with other people, and do something you didn't think possible. So from there, I was really hooked and started running marathons. Had a couple of really great races. I wasn't really having any issues with injuries. I think probably because I started so slowly and kind of worked up over time, like not because I knew to do that, but just naturally. And then, I ran a 50-mile race 2 falls ago, and that was sort of like the pinnacle. I was like, this is really awesome. Really, really magical finishing that race. It was like part trails, part road, really big. It's one of the biggest ultra marathons in the world, the JFK 50 miler. And so I loved it. Everything was going great. Occasionally I would have like runner's knee, kind of like some knee pain when I was driving or things like that. But I kind of had in my head that I was invincible. So, um,
Most people get that before, like, a major injury.
yeah, exactly. So you can see where this is going, but not quite. So then the last thing I did, I had a really big training cycle. My goal was to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So, I went out and I was doing a lot of mileage, which mileage wasn't really a problem for me, but I was doing a ton of like speed work and hills, it's a bunch of 70-mile weeks with a lot of speed. I went out and I raced the marathon and I qualified. But then in the weeks after, I was realizing that just something wasn't quite right. I gave myself some time to recover, maybe not enough. But there was just this pain, and I couldn't even really identify it. It was, it wasn't something that came on really sharply. It was starting to hurt a lot, basically like in my butt when I was running, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And I remember one trail run with friends. It was like 19 miles. We got like halfway through, and I just really just broke down crying because I was like, something's wrong. Like it hurts to do the things that I thought, were so easy before. And then we had to run back.
Wow.
So it was rough, but that's kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I need to do something.
Can I ask how
Yeah.
long, like, it's probably hard to remember, but how long do you reckon it took you to go from the very first onset of symptoms to that moment where it's like, okay, I really need to do something about it?
I think I started, honestly, it was probably a couple of weeks. And it all happened like after the marathon. Maybe I didn't even notice the pain at first. It probably crept on very, very slowly. But I just remember like, trying to come back from this race and just feeling like something wasn't quite right. I also did some, I thought in my head, I was like, oh, hills are better for your body than speed work. So I did like some hill workouts. And like in retrospect, I think all of that kind of exacerbated it. Like probably I was already in like a weakened state from having trained and raced so hard. And then, I don't know. I think it was over a couple of weeks where I went from like something's not quite right to like just like bawling in the middle of the woods in Wisconsin with like 18 or sorry like 8 or 9 miles to head back to the car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, like I said, we're structuring this slightly differently. So we know you're not entirely out of the woods just yet, but you've had some significant insights and progress along with this rehab. But we have 6 areas or things that you'd like to cover, 6 insights, we'll call it. But I guess it would be nice to sort of get people up to date with your
Mhm.
rehab and like how things are going currently, what your current sort of running mileage and symptoms are like that. So could we just fast forward through your rehab and just give us a brief summary of like what you've gone through and what you're up to now?
Yeah. So if we want to like fast forward to the current day, I think I'm like definitely like on track to, being able to do anything I want. I think I am at a point where I can do whatever I want to. Have to be kind of smart about it and make sure I'm like keeping up with the exercises. I still do feel the PHT occasionally. We could talk about it. I kind of went away for a while. I thought I was out of the woods. had kind of a bad flare up. I think now I'm not like, certainly I feel it, but I'm not so worried about it being like this huge limitation
Yeah.
anymore. And so I'm just back at it. I'm I'm training for a 100-mile race. I've signed up for one in
Wow.
September. So yeah, I don't think I'm like fully, healed or, 100% recovered. But I don't feel like it's a limitation
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, the fact that you've got that race to train for and you feel like you're not too worried about it, I'd say you've made significant inroads. From now until, when you first started having rehab or seeking
Mhm.
treatment, how long has that been in its entirety?
Yeah, so it was probably I think it was about May or June of last year when I like really was like, all right, I have to. At the time, I was like, I have to stop.
Yeah.
I have to like. In my head, I was like, okay, first things first. You just take some time off,
Yeah.
right? And so yeah, that's when I kind of started really dealing with stuff. And then I would say there were a few months of it being kind of bad and kind of being out in the woods trying to figure out what to do with my rehab. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about sort of how how that process went,
Yeah.
and what happened in the midterm in the meantime, if you like. But
Yeah. Well, I think we'll dive into that because so we're looking about 12 months later, a lot of
yeah,
success, a lot of momentum with some hiccups along the way.
yeah,
When I asked you to write down some of your insights, the first one that you wrote down was flare ups are normal and can be managed. Um, so talk us through that flare up itself and how you managed to negotiate it.
yeah. So let's see. I, after a few months of physical therapy that didn't quite go well, and then working with you, and then, I kind of was back on track. And so I had a training cycle I started like around the beginning of this year to train for the Boston Marathon. And when I talked to you initially, I said my goal was that I wanted to like set a PR in the Boston Marathon. At the time, that seemed actually like a stretch because at that moment, I was afraid to run fast. I was afraid to run up hills. I had gotten to a point where I was like, okay, I can run slowly, and that doesn't seem to irritate things. But like 2 fast laps around the track were worse than a 20-mile run. Um, so working through doing the lifting exercises, just keeping really consistent, I got to a good place. And so I kind of thought I was out of the woods, honestly. Like January, February, I was feeling great. I was having other little issues along the way, but the PHT itself, I was just like, who would have thought this would be the least of my worries? So I thought I was out of the woods. And then I had a flare up, and it was basically the week before my peak week. So in my mind at that moment, I was kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, what do you do? Like, do I do the peak week? Do I do these speed workouts? Do I keep going at what I'm at? And also like the pain, it was really bad, honestly. Like I think it was brought on by between the training and like doing a lot of sitting. And one day I sat for like 6 hours, working really hard on this hard bench. And then I got up and I was in a lot of pain. And I think at that moment I got really discouraged. I sort of was thinking, this is it, right? Like I've undone all this progress, and now that goal of running fast in Boston is not going to happen. I think I really kind of sunk down emotionally when that happened. And I kind of sat there for a little while trying to figure out what to do. And then eventually I was like, okay, let me just make a plan. Let me just keep moving forward. I went back and I listened to like old episodes of the podcast about like flare ups. And, specifically, I remember, the difference between like a painful weak tendon and a painful strong tendon. And I was like, I know this is a strong tendon because I'm lifting way heavier than I was, a few months ago. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna cut back. I'm gonna rearrange. I'm gonna maybe like not do the two big workouts that I had planned during that peak week. I still did one of them. I was probably playing with fire a little bit, but it's hard to, you know, um, I don't know. I like to do what's in the plan.
Yeah.
And then I tapered, but I was still feeling the pain. And so even like leading up to the race, I was just thinking like it just might be it. I just might not be able to do it. And then, I went and I had the race. It was about a month ago, and I was like I was surprised it was not the limiting factor, and I think because I kind of like trusted what I'd been doing, and I trusted that I, had grown stronger, I was able to go into that race. And a lot of things hurt really bad during the race. Maybe the tendon hurt, I just didn't notice it because like my legs were exploding everywhere else. But it was just in the end, like, I wish I could go back and say, like, this isn't the end of your goals, right? Like, you can have a flare up and move through it and still be able to achieve what you want to.
Yeah. So many times I have had people have like 3, 4 good months and they're like, yes, I'm so happy. I'm so grateful. I'm back to doing all this. This is amazing. And then they have a flare up that lasts 3 days and it's like they're back to square one. Like in their mind, they start
Yeah.
to question everything. They start to question, like, am I always going to have this? Is what I'm doing working? Maybe I should give up running altogether. Like all this sort of stuff. And they completely forget about the 3, 4 months that they've had going from strength to strength, rebuilding. And it can be really like emotionally detrimental to the rehab as well. And I understand it. Like people are miserable when they're in pain. It's very
Yeah.
closely linked, and
Yeah.
I understand it. I've had those thoughts when I've been injured as well, but constantly see it. Um, And
Yeah.
to your point, there is a big difference between a painful weak tendon and a painful strong tendon, because the strong tendons will be just as painful but will revert back to baseline a lot quicker, and you actually
Mhm.
manage it quite easily, um,
Mhm.
compared to someone who's got a flare up with a weak tendon and it fluctuates wildly. Flare ups last 2 weeks. Flare ups just come out of nowhere, out of like really insignificant sort of
Mhm.
moments. And yeah, to your point, you've put in all this strength work, you've put in all this training, you've built up all these successful miles, and then had a flare up. Makes sense as to why you have the same frustrations as any other person who goes through a flare up, but then you sort of manage it and get through the big weeks and get through race day, and come across not 100%, but actually well manage the race.
Yeah.
But back to the mental side of things, the frustrations. You mentioned trusting
Mhm.
that you've done the hard work. But for other people who are really struggling mentally, any other tips and strategies for those to help negotiate that particular phase?
Oh man, I don't know. It's really hard. I understand, like, for people like me who just love running or love your sport so much, and just feeling like you can't do it. It's so hard. I mean, there's all kinds of, sometimes I try to, like, maybe focus on like finding a silver lining. We can talk about that a little bit later. Um, but I don't know. I just think that, okay, here's what's helpful. I think having a course of action is
Mm,
very helpful in those moments. I think, I literally had to sit down and sort of write out what the week was going to look like. Write out, the isometrics that I was going to do. I just really, for me, I needed a plan, and once I have a plan, I feel like I can execute it. And that was
mm.
actually, going back, I mean, to the early stages of this injury, that's what was so frustrating and so hard, was not like really having a plan, because I felt like I hadn't really understood yet what the injury was, and what I needed to do. So I think that can be super helpful to managing the
Absolutely.
frustration.
I was actually hoping that you'd mention that, because you did say prior that you wrote down these things, you adjusted. Do I do this big workout? Do I not? Do I sort of make these
Yeah.
adjustments? And you did mention like keeping to that plan. I think that's great. I think people can be more proactive than they realize during a
Hmm.
flare up. It's not just laying in bed and being in misery. It is, you
Yeah.
can cross train, you can
Hmm.
do some isometrics, you might scale back your strength training a little bit, you might scale back some of your speed sessions, you might modify your sitting, all that sort of stuff. You can be a lot more proactive than you think. And
Yeah.
because flare ups are really a big mental hurdle, just having a plan helps that mental side. It might not help too much the pain side. Well, it could. If your brain sort of settles down, then pain can settle down. But you know, people just realize, I've had so many people that have this injury, and as soon as we write a plan and put it down, they're like, man, I feel so much better. Even my pain's calmed down. I just mentally, I'm in a good place. So yes, it does require some adjustments when you do have a flare up, but go back to the drawing board, be resourceful, make those
Yeah.
adjustments, and you can feel better.
It definitely, it's empowering, right? There's nothing worse than just feeling like you don't have any power over the situation, and writing a plan helps with that. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. And I guess trusting the process as well. Um, the second out of our 6 insights that you had, you mentioned don't be afraid of pain, but don't obsess over it and don't obsess over it. So I
Yeah.
want to kind of break those down to 2 points. So the first one, don't be afraid of pain. So what did you learn, or what have you learned about your pain, and making sure that, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, how do you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to, go back to kind of the early stages when, I don't think I really had like a good sense of what the injury was and what the rehab needed to look like. The doctor told me, okay, you can't run for a month, and then the PTs were like, don't run, and it was all just like, if you're feeling any pain, you shouldn't be running. And I think one of the kind of earliest lessons I learned that was helpful was that, this injury doesn't love rest. That like you can and actually maybe should be, continuing to do whatever level of activity is going to, keep you within the guidelines. The guidelines being, 3 out of 10 or less during the activity, back to baseline in 24 hours, and, progression week to week. I've done my
Well
homework.
done. Full
Yeah.
marks.
But no, I mean, just honestly, like that was very helpful because, learning that, and then realizing that, like, yeah, it was hurting when I would run initially, but honestly, not that much. And I think like even a little bit of pain, it can be really scary because you're thinking this is a signal that I need to stop. And just knowing, not to let that get blown out of proportion. So, when I was having this flare up, right as I was finishing my marathon training cycle, I would just like, I felt like I was reading tea leaves at every moment. I would be like standing on like one foot, kind of doing the shoe test constantly. I was always just like trying to like, is it there? Is it not there? Like climbing the stairs into my apartment after every run, I would feel that pain, and I would just think, when it wasn't actually that bad, but the fact that it was there was really unsettling to me. Um, and, again, like I said, I was just so convinced that that meant that I could not run a good race. And it really wasn't the case at all.
Mm,
So like now, it's getting better. I'm not feeling as much pain during runs and things like that, which is great. And that just says to me that, this is okay, right? This is progress.
yeah.
Just because you feel it doesn't mean that like, it's bad or it's gotten worse or something. It's just so hard to read those signals sometimes, but I think with time and with experience, you get a better sense of it.
Yeah. You started by saying that rest doesn't work. Unfortunately, a lot of people go through the same uh, journey of being told like you can't run or you can't exercise or you should rest, and a
Hmm.
couple months later they're saying, well, I still have this injury. Well, what's the go? And I'd say, we're talking about PHT, but I'd also mention for most overuse injuries,
Hmm.
the exception being probably stress fractures or bone stress reactions, but most of them don't really fare with rest, and you can be active as long as these guidelines do allow. And one thing I'll mention on top of that is, you mentioned progressing week by week, but I also mentioned that your symptoms should be like um, trending on the improve, week by week or
Hmm.
month by month. A lot of people say, I'm following your pain rules, Brodie. I've got a 2 out of 10 during my running. It returns back to baseline. And, that continues, that same pattern continues for 6 months. And, you know, that's still not a good trend
Hmm.
to be in. That's still mismanaging it in a way. So, provided, say, you over the last 12 months have managed to go from race to race feeling better and better, that's a good sign that your management, your load management is on the improve. So that long-term trend is important. Um,
Hmm.
very
Yeah.
good discussing the pain guidelines, but you also mentioned to not obsess over the pain. You mentioned climbing stairs, doing like the
Yeah.
shoe off test to see if the pain's
Yeah.
still there and those sorts of
Mhm.
things. This is what I struggle with as a physio as well, because I like to know the pain scores. I like to know where my clients are with how they're reacting, how long it takes to revert back to baseline, what's the pain like during the running. But at the same time, I also don't want people to obsess over it. So it's kind
Mhm.
of like this conflicting, um, you know, dissonance that I have where how do I find the balance between identifying the pain, knowing the pain characteristics and whether we're heading in the right direction, but also not getting people to obsess over the pain. Because when it comes to pain science and those sorts of things, if you become hyper vigilant of that area and really fixate, that doesn't help rehab either, because things become more sensitized. The worry, the fears, the emotions, and all that sort of stuff are always there, which actually, you ruminate and have these negative sort of loops and go through like catastrophization and
Yeah.
fear of movement and all those sorts of things. How have you managed to find the balance between the two?
Well, I think like, what you just said about that like sensitization and realizing, um, it's not that pain is all in your head, but really it is like very much, a neurological phenomenon. There is like
Definitely.
a connection there. So, like noticing like I'll be running and I'm, wrapped up in my audiobook or conversation or whatever. And then I'll think like, oh, I wonder if my injury hurts. And then I like focus on it. And then I'm like, oh, wow, it hurts. It's not like it started hurting in that
No.
exact moment, right? It's just that I was kind of like giving it that attention. And once you give it that attention, it like takes on an outsized importance.
Hmm.
So I think like, obviously if you're in a lot of pain, you're going to notice that. But I think like, just allowing yourself to be distracted and just not be focusing on it all the time is really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm talking with clients, like a big sign that they're actually getting better is when they're like, oh, I actually went for a 40-minute run. I didn't think about my injury once. Or,
Mhm.
you know what, I just sat down at a 3-hour meeting and didn't think about my sitting pain at all.
Mhm.
Those attitudes are knowing that yes, you're getting better because pain is less, but also your mind isn't that fixation, that hypervigilance,
Mhm.
focused attention isn't there, or like is fading away. So it's sort of addressing the physical and the emotional side of things as well. So when that tends to happen, always like good, that momentum really shifts and carries over. Um,
Mhm.
Excellent. Well, the third point that you have is that rehab isn't all or nothing.
Yeah.
What exactly did you mean by that?
I think what I meant by that is that like above all else, you just want to be consistent and show up as much as you can. Um, I mean that, you might want to do all these exercises on Tuesday and these on Thursday, and that's your plan and you're really like sticking to it. And I was, sticking, to my plan very good, well, for a long time. But then, life comes up, right? And, I was using the gym at work and then I was working from home. So I found that I was skipping things. And initially, like, I would just, maybe not do it or maybe just do one a week. And then it got to the point where it was like, do whatever you can at home. Just try to keep the habit alive so that it's still there when you can like go back to like, doing your, A plus, rehab, right? Like, I mean, there are little things I can do at home with like the band and like the jumping lunges and all these things that don't require, a barbell. I probably, if I, wanted to, I probably could have found like alternatives, things that I can do at home. But just in general, I think it's really good to just keep the habits alive, even if you're only doing a fraction of it. It's so much better than not doing it at all because it's really easy to kind of just let the habits die out.
Yeah. Similar to when we're talking about the flare ups, about being resourceful and flexible and adjusting to the plans. Because, people have lives, people travel, people have different like work commitments, stress, and all those sorts of things where, plans change as well as flare ups, symptoms change, your goals change, and we need to be flexible in those circumstances. Um,
Mhm.
Can you recall, or do you have any favorites when it comes to exercises at the gym, when it comes to exercises at home that you think really helped you and helped move the needle with your recovery?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the deadlifts, probably the RDLs, the Romanian deadlifts. Those are so much fun. I love those. I loved, it was
What do
kind
you
of the
love about
first
them?
time. Well, it was kind of the first time I'd like gone to that part of the gym with the barbells and the big weights that you lift up, and and it's a bunch of dudes, and I'm like, no, I'm here too. Like, I belong
Nice.
in this part of the gym. You got a guy hovering your shoulder, like, are you done? Are you? I'm like, no, I'm not done. Like, um, uh, yeah, it was really fun, and it's like it's such a great exercise because you can progress and like you can see yourself lifting heavier and getting better at it. So yeah, and from my understanding, it's just such a great exercise for runners to do. So I really enjoyed doing the deadlifts.
Well
I
done.
hate the step ups.
Okay. Yep. Each to their
I
own.
kind of stopped doing them.
Thanks
But
for your honesty on the podcast.
no, but I think yeah, well, this is related to probably the next point, honestly.
Okay. What about any home exercises?
Home exercises. Let's see. Oh, the kind of the hamstring curls with the band.
Hmm.
I don't know if you call it prone or
Yeah.
supine when you're laying
Well,
on. Yeah.
yeah. Prone
Uh,
just means you're lying on your stomach. So yeah, prone
yeah.
hamstring curl. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really like those because you do them kind of fast, and I feel like it's really doing something. Also the you call them the heel hammers, or I
Oh
call
yeah.
it the
Yeah.
tantrums. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are great ones, and like you can do them at home, no problem at all. So I really like those as well.
I'll talk people through those. So, like, it's almost like a long lever bridge where you have your feet really far away from your body, but then you have your feet elevated on like a bench or a chair or something. So, you're looking at a double leg long lever bridge, but then you have this like a baby kicking a tantrum. You have this really fast, rapid heel kind of your heels coming down into that bench or into that chair, and you're quickly swapping from one leg to another. It is just a burner for the hamstrings and really fires them really well. Works well for the hamstring itself, the upper hamstring, the tendon. Um, it's just about, I guess, progressing your way to eventually tolerating that. It's probably one of the end stage exercises, particularly for those who want to get involved into speed work and faster running and hills and all that sort of stuff that really requires that rapid sort of activation. But yeah, that's a good one.
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, we'll move on to number 4, which you've had here is don't be afraid to progress, but don't overdo it.
Yeah.
So, how have you progressed, or have you found a method for progressing through your exercises to make sure that you have the balance between the two?
Yeah, so I guess I'm figuring that out right now. I did take, a couple of weeks off after my last marathon, so I'm actually kind of coming back. So I'm not even really at the level that I was, about a month or so ago. Um, but yeah, I know you've talked on the podcast about don't be afraid to progress, but I think some of us might have the opposite problem where we get a
Yes.
little bit too excited. So I think that's actually probably part of my love hate relationship with step ups, is that I was just trying to do much too heavy weights. Like I thought that I needed to, and I was starting to actually feel some pain in like my IT band, right?
Hmm.
So the hamstring tendon was fine. So I was like, okay, I have to keep progressing. But I think I was kind of starting to ignore signals from other parts of the body.
Yeah.
Um, and the same thing happened with the deadlifts. I think I heard, oh, you want to, get to your body weight. So I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to get to my body weight, but you can't just make that happen because you want it to happen. It like really, you really need to get there. So I think for me, like part of the key has been, if you're advancing the weight, you need to decrease the number of reps, right? Like you can't go from 12 reps at, 100 to, 12 reps at 110. It's better to go to, 8, or with the step ups like 6, So I think for me, like the key with the progressions was really just tuning in to my body and knowing that if it's really hurting, even if it's hurting places that aren't, the hamstring tendon, that's when you need to just be smart and don't be a hero. You know,
Mm.
just try to be smart about it.
Yeah, well said. I think there are some guidelines for people to follow, those who are listening, whether it's for deadlifts or any other exercise. I think coming up with some sort of progression chart on paper that sort of makes sense step by step. So you have phase 1, phase 2, all the way down, and every increment is only just a very mild jump. So, you would understand that what I do with most of my exercises, and I've explained on the podcast before, if we're doing an exercise and we're hovering around 8 to 12 repetitions. Sometimes I do 6 to 10, sometimes 8 to 12. But let's just say if you're doing your deadlifts and you're doing 3 sets of 8 at a certain weight, the next progression can just be 3 sets of 10. The next progression can be 3 sets of 12. So we're only just increasing by 2 reps every single time, which on paper doesn't look that abrupt. But then when we get to 12 reps and want to drop back down to 8 reps, we then increase the weight. So increase the weight, drop back down to 8, then with that weight go 8, 10, 12, and repeat the process. But we can also listen to our body, and there's a few instructions I like to give out regarding when it's time to progress. So I like to say progress 1 when symptoms allow. So we're talking about pain less than a 3 or a 4 out of 10, returning back to baseline, those things we were talking about before. 2, making sure that your form and technique and the level of challenge is okay, making sure that you're really completing good quality with all of those sets and reps. I know a lot of people that say, yeah, but my grip strength really struggles by the 3rd set and, I'm struggling to get through the end. Well, maybe you need to take more of a break between sets, or maybe you just, maybe that quality just needs to improve before you can progress. And 3, you need to make sure that the rest of the body agrees with you as well. So not just talking about symptoms, not just talking about your injury, talking about the rest of the body. So for deadlifts, common for people to get strain in their lower back. For your step ups, you said that the ITB was starting to cause issues, even though your symptoms were fine and your injury was fine. Your body was giving you signs that, let's not progress. Let's either, drop things back. And so you need to listen to the rest of the body as well. And then when you do execute the next progression, make sure you're only progressing 1 exercise at a time. So, or 2 exercises. We don't want to do all of your 6 exercises and progress all of those in one workout, because then that's increasing the risk of overload and that sort of stuff. So all those sorts of things to bear in mind. Would that resonate with you? All those sort of instructions agree with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely the grip strength point, that really came into play. So I was looking at, like, do I need to get these like wraps that people have around their wrists, or, but maybe I just need to wait, or maybe I was just pushing it like a little bit too hard if I was really, really struggling
Yeah.
at the end. Yeah.
Did you find things that worked for you?
Um, I didn't get quite that far
Okay.
before I had to kind of cut back for the race. I think I'm still like working up towards that, I guess, because now I'm back to kind of like a lower weight, because I feel like I'm building up.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do think that, maybe the wrist wraps helped a little bit, but I haven't quite gotten to the point yet where that's a limiting factor.
When you were lifting heavy with your deadlifts, out of curiosity, how much rest were you taking in between sets?
Not a ton. Like, maybe like I would walk over, fill up my water bottle, have a few drinks, and then come back.
Okay, so
So
maybe about a minute or so.
yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah,
How long should you wait?
that's a good question. Depends how heavy you're lifting, and depends. I like to say that your grip strength, if you can comfortably hold on to the bar for your first set, it should feel the same. Second set, it should feel the same. Third set, and if you're getting this accumulation of grip strength fatigue throughout the second and third set, you're probably not resting enough. And sometimes I rest for 5 minutes just because the weight is so heavy, and your grip strength takes so long to recover that you can superset something. So you do your deadlift. I know in a gym setting, it's not the best because people are waiting to use the bars and that sort of stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
in an ideal world, I would do a deadlift, go away, do like some push-ups or do like some core stuff or a plank, just mix it up with something else while your grip strength is resting. Don't do what some other clients have done and go away and do another exercise that requires a lot of grip strength, like a chin up or something.
Mm-hmm.
Wait for it to recover, go back to your second set. Sometimes that might be 2 or 3 minutes, probably on average is what I'd recommend. But if it's really, really heavy, walk away for, 4 or 5 minutes and then come back. So, um,
Great.
a few tips there. You're not going
Yeah.
to deload. It's not a progression to do like less rest breaks or fewer rest breaks. You're still going to reap all the benefit of the deadlift if you spend longer away between your sets. So something to bear in mind. Okay, number 5, we have PHT sucks and you are entitled to feel frustrated, but find the silver lining if you can. So when people are injured, you mentioned you alluded to silver linings before. So, what are some examples? Can you remember any silver linings that you had?
Yeah, I think there are probably a couple of probably good things that came out of this. So first of all, I don't know. I think sometimes injuries can like just be your body's way of just forcing you to slow down a little bit. Like I said, I thought I was invincible. The sky's the limit. um, and obviously that's not sustainable. And so sometimes it's kind of naturally just pump the brakes a little bit. And I know I have a lot of friends who've come back from injuries, stronger than before. And, maybe it's because of the cross training or strength or whatever they were doing, or maybe it's just because your body kind of needed a bit of a reset. So I do think that that's probably part of it. My body probably enjoyed having a break from these like really intense training cycles. Other parts, things beyond, the hamstring, the tendon. Um, and then, also the I think my legs have just gotten a lot stronger. I think I felt that. I certainly think like the Boston Marathon course, it's like tons of downhill, and then you have hills starting at mile 16. I just felt like there was a lot of like power in my legs. To the point where at the end I was like, okay, just I was saying to myself, just let your legs do it. You don't have to do it. You don't have to run. Like I just felt like I could kind of just trust that. And I do feel stronger than before. And then the last thing, which I suspect is related to the break and all of the rehab, is that persistent runner's knee that I've had, like kind of low lying pretty much the entire time I've been running and doing big races was was absent this training. So somehow whatever I've been through in the last year has really helped with that issue, because I know historically like it really hurts to drive, like being in that position I'd get to a point where I really need to stretch out my leg. And there was a moment, about a month or two ago where I was like, where's that pain? It's not there. So maybe that has something to do with all the strengthening as well, or the rest. But I do feel like I've probably built back better, come back stronger in some
Yeah.
ways.
Just as you were explaining that, like as I was listening to that, I was writing down a few silver linings that people might have. First of all, like you can learn from every injury, you can learn from every flare up. Like there is something in there that you can take away. First and foremost, you might realize if you are a runner and you do some speed work, and then you get PHT, hey, you might realize, okay, maybe that speed work was too much of a jump. So now you realize, okay, what did I do? What am I doing now compared to what I used to? Okay, if that's too much, too abrupt, let me make sure I don't do that again. But
Mm-hmm.
also, you identify that training error, but you also work out yourself where your weak links are when you do speed work. You might say, because some people do speed work and get an Achilles tendinopathy or plantar fasciitis or hip flexor strains. And if you're getting a hamstring issue, that's probably a vulnerability that you need to strengthen up. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's like you said, it's your body telling you a few things that you maybe are overtraining or um, there might be some signs there for you individually. But we can learn from injuries. We can learn from every flare up exactly the same. Okay, what was that adjustment? Why did that flare up? Was it my sitting? Am I under stress? Was it my sleep and recovery, or was it my training load? Um, And then as a silver lining with your rehab, hey, I'm just building on tools. I'm just uncovering all these management tools to help me in the future and with my future injuries so that I do come back stronger. I do come back with more knowledge, more wisdom to not only help this injury, but also help every other injury that I have in the future. Because the management's the same. Like on the Run Smarter podcast, like I have universal principles that matter for most running related injuries. It is, you know, don't mismanage, don't overload, get stronger, you know, build, bridge the gap between what you can currently tolerate and what you need to tolerate in the future. And that's a prime example that you say, you know, I'm treating this PHT and all of a sudden my knee's feeling better. Well, that's probably because you've been doing the strength work. You're loading yourself, like your training loads are not being mismanaged. So when you build up your mileage or when you build up your speed work, it's sensible, it's progressive, you're listening to your body along the way. And so no doubt that the tools and strategies and lessons that you're learning will not only matter for your current PHT, but it'll matter for your current other injuries, and then will matter for all your other future injuries. So, plenty of silver linings there for anyone who needs a little bit of a positive outlook with their rehab. So, well done.
And I do want to say the first part of that was important too. Like, it's okay also to recognize that this is not fun. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to come off as being like, oh, always just look on the bright side, like especially for someone, if running is like a huge part of your identity, your mental health, maybe your social network, like it's okay to also kind of like mourn the fact that you're not able, you're being like limited for a little while. And I think it's important to kind of not just push those feelings down. You could experience them, but then, for your own sake, if you can kind of shift it to look, maybe try to see a positive, I just do find that it actually, it just helps, right? That's not to invalidate the difficulty of going through something like this, but it can be, I think, helpful.
Yeah. I think that's very wise to say because a lot of times on the podcast, I talk about, hey, there's positives to focus on. Stay positive, stay positive. When people are like, Brodie, what the hell are you talking about? I'm in pain. I'm in misery. I can't think of one positive thing. Sometimes that's reassurance that your frustration is justified. I think that's very well said. Okay, number 6, we have don't let anyone define progress for you or make you feel weak.
Yes.
What can you say on this topic?
I think here the key point is to just really know what your goals are and what's important to you, and and stay focused on that. So this kind of stems from, kind of my frustration of not initially really knowing what the injury was, and um, going to PT, and I guess the doctor had written something about like hip strength, that my hips were weak, and that was part of why I was going to PT, which I'd never thought of my hips as being weak, but so then I'm going to PT, and they're just like so focused on my hip strength, and I was really frustrated. It's probably partly my like failure to like communicate, but I just felt like they were just saying like, okay, don't run. You got to get your hips stronger, and I think I don't care about my hips, and probably at that point I was in some kind of like pain, rest, weakness, downward spiral, and my hips weren't getting stronger. I was doing what they were telling me to do, but I was also just starting to, it was really actually demoralizing, to be honest, to the point where I started to kind of run. They were saying, don't run, don't run. I started to run because I'd been doing all this reading. I thought I can do this, I think, and like be smart about it and kind of build it up in a way. But then I'd go to like PT and they'd be like, "Ugh, why did you run? That's terrible." Instead of saying like, "How did it go? Like, how did you
Hmm.
feel? Like, are you moving towards where you want to be?" And then I remember like one day I went in and it was like a different PT than the one I'd been going to, and she like read through the notes and she started off. She said, "Well, it sounds like it's really not going well." And at that moment, I just like lost it. I was like, it's going great. Like
Wow.
I ran 15 miles, without pain this past weekend, right? Like, or I felt it a little bit, but then I was back to normal. And I was just like so frustrated at my inability to kind of like communicate the things that like mattered to me and sort of have that be validated. So I think like there, the lesson is that, um, if you feel like you're not, being heard, maybe try to be heard, like try to just make it very clear to the people who are helping you, like what your priorities are and what matters to you. And that's like an empowering thing to be like, look, I'm in charge, and okay, you I guess you think my hips are weak and whatever, but I'm running and I'm happy, and that's success for me. So yeah, I think that's where it came. It was really like a low point, just feeling like I wasn't doing the right thing. I wasn't making progress in the ways they wanted me to. And then just to be able to realize, like, hey, no, like, I'm actually running. That's what I want to be doing,
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think that's just where I was coming from with that.
You're following, I guess, your intuition a bit as well, or like getting like an intuitive sense of, I feel like I should be heading in this direction. And when you start heading in that direction, you're actually like getting better. And so that's obviously a good sign. Like you say, running 15 miles pain free, this is like the progress that I'm making with this path. But it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to go against like, medical professionals and like, on the contrary to what they might think or
Yeah.
might see. And like, bit of a tangent, like my girlfriend and I, we have a baby due in 6 weeks, and we're
Oh,
doing these baby
congratulations.
classes. Thank you.
Mhm.
We're doing all these baby classes where these midwives, or this midwife we're listening to, is saying like, if you don't feel like this intervention that they're requesting while you're in labor is right for you, then you just question them and you ask about the risks, benefits, intuition, like what about if we do nothing, what are the alternatives, all these sort of things. And I think to myself, like, how many people would actually push back on a doctor or a professional or a midwife or someone that's suggesting something? You'd
Mhm.
go ahead and just do it. If they say, "Oh, we think we should do this," you say, "All right, let's do it. You're the professional." But you know, listening to these as well, there's a lot of stories of people who have gone down the wrong path, and on the other side of it, they're like, "Hey, I actually probably should have spoken up there, and let me know
Mhm.
my frustrations or my concerns, or ask about alternatives." And I, I was struggling with that in the past couple of weeks, but hearing your story, like, relates. Like, I'm a physio, so I kind of know like that side of things. But as a patient who doesn't know much
Yeah.
about an injury and knows, oh, my health professional said I can't run, otherwise it's going to make it worse. Who's going to push back on that if you don't have that wisdom and that knowledge? So I totally get that. And back to your point about, don't let anyone define your progress. As long as you are making progress, and as long as, well, if you're not making progress, you should change something, whether that's what your health professional is advising or whether you go against what they're advising. If you try something and it starts working in a favor, then head in that direction. But the pace of recovery, a lot of people listen to the PHT podcast and say, your success stories, they're lifting 70 pounds, 100 pounds. That's not me. I'm nowhere near that. And, I'm experiencing like this because I can't even do, you know, 10 glute bridges. Um,
Mhm.
you define your own starting point, you define your own rate of progression. Everyone has a different starting point, but as long as you're moving in the right direction and you're seeing the benefits very slowly, but don't let anyone define your speed of recovery. Because a lot of times they ask the question, how long does PHT take until I'm back? I have no idea. We have to
Yeah.
make a start. We have to see how you respond. We have to, you know, go through a lot of trials to gather more data to know how long it might take, because everyone's completely different.
I really resonate with what you said about, not wanting to push back against professionals, but like, at the end of the day, like, sometimes they don't have like a clear answer, like
Mm.
I've gone through, talked to different people who said I had different things going on. One of them's probably wrong, they can't
Yeah,
both
of
be right at
course.
the same time, with friends who've gone through different injury journeys, from person to person. Like you don't, I mean, obviously we want to have respect for like the expertise of people who've like studied this, but at the end of the day, it's kind of your body, and you probably, have some sense of what's going on and if that seems right or not quite right. And, for me, it was like a really empowering moment when I was like, I talked to someone who had said like, oh, I have PHT. It sounds like very similar. And it was a very empowering moment to me to just like go and just like search for like medical journal, like search for articles. And I found like a very helpful, peer-reviewed article that talks about PHT. And that's where I was like, really like, I think this is actually what's going on here. I kind of had to like self-diagnose to some extent. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely like a balance between like trusting people and also knowing that they're human as well. And, like maybe you need to meet
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
I like to think of it as, and you sort of mentioned this a little bit as well, taking control. And I like to think of it as you're the client, the injured person, the athlete. You are in the driver's seat. You've
Mhm.
got your hands on the steering wheel. You've got your hands on or your foot on the accelerator and the brake. You have complete control. The other health professionals and doctors and other runners, they're just in the back seat. They can hand you the roadmap. They can give you a bit of guidance here and there, but ultimately you have control of where that car goes, how fast it goes, where the turns are made. Don't let health professionals take the wheel, take control of the car, and push you into the back seat. That's not how rehab should go, because you mentioned empowering before. Like, we want people to feel empowered, in control, and making sure they're heard and they're a part of the rehab process. So um, if you're listening to this now and you don't feel like you have your hands on the steering wheel, like, start making a few different moves, start asking some questions, pushing back a little bit, or just asking questions, making sure that you're asking enough questions so that you feel like you do have control, and yeah, sort of shift that power of control.
Yeah.
I wanted
Exactly.
to finish off with so we've covered all those six insights, which was fantastic. So thanks for sharing those. I thought it'd be nice to wrap up sort of where to now. Like, what do you have planned in the next couple of weeks, months? I know you said you have this race coming up. When it comes to your rehab and those sort of things, what are you focusing on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I just had an incredible race. Really, it was like
Congratulations,
a
too.
high point. Yeah, no, thank you. It was like really a high point of, running so far, especially because, when I started training for this marathon, I was afraid to I was afraid to run fast. I was really afraid to do hills. I had a lot of fear. And I feel like it was just, such a great training cycle, working through the challenges along the way. And then like the race itself was just, incredible. And I achieved the goal, I got my PR, but, I'm kind of bored with running a faster marathon now. Um, yeah, the next thing is to spend a lot of time out on trails. I'm super excited to train for this. It's called the Run Woodstock. It's the Hallucination 100-mile
Ooh,
race in September. Big running festival with kind of a looped course, and I'm just excited to, you know, go out and do what I love, which is run long, slow miles and eat a lot of food while I'm out there running. And, it's like a very different thing. I think it's strangely probably kind of PHT friendly just because it's so slow and with walking and all of that. So I think it's probably going to be a decent, thing to train for with my injury. And I'm just going to keep getting stronger and stronger. And who knows what comes next, but really I'm just so thrilled to have like the joy of running in my life.
yeah.
um, yeah.
Well said. I think a lot of people ask me how long until I'm back, how long until this goes away forever, or will this ever go away forever? And I tend to explain to them that you can get back to all the races, all the goals that you have, but if it ever has a hiccup, if you ever have to sit for a long period of time, if you ever have like, if you want to try and run a fast marathon, you do a lot of sprint work and
Mhm.
those sorts of things, like the odds of it like resurfacing is going to be quite high. Like, it's, if you do all the right things, you can still like really challenge your injury and symptoms can arise, but, and I highlight but, it's going to be really insignificant. You're not going to worry about it. Um, and you sort of at the start of your story sort of explain that. You're sort of like, I'm signing up for these races and I'm not out of the woods because I still have a few symptoms. Like, it's not gone, but I'm doing what I love and it's not a worry. It's nothing that's you wouldn't have like a major concern that like, oh, this is going to disrupt all my goals, or am I ever going to run again, and those sorts of things. Like you're living with it and improving, and who knows, maybe you go 2-3 years without any symptoms. That's definitely within the possibility. Like I've had PHT for years and I haven't had symptoms resurface for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years or so. And I know if I run a really fast marathon tomorrow and then I have to jump on a long haul flight, my hamstrings will be pretty sore afterwards, and the next day will be completely fine because I've done all the strength work and those sorts of things. To your point, it's not gone completely, but I have no worry whatsoever, and happy to, accept all these goals and all these challenges and enjoy all those sorts of things. So really encapsulates where you are right now, really encapsulates my answer to that question. And so I hope that helps a lot of people going through these sort of similar scenarios. And you've done an incredible amount of work and dedication to your rehab, and it's good to see that you've got to the place where you are now. So I think this is going to help a lot of people with all these sort of different topics that we've talked about. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I found these resources to be super helpful. And, like the biggest thing is it's just feeling empowered and knowing that, it's not all over, there are things that I can do. And if I feel a little bit of pain, it's really not the end of the world. It's just, like you said, you might have to like live with it to some respects, but I was recently reminded that marathons are really, really painful anyway.
Yeah. Well,
so like, what's a little like tented like pain in the middle of it, especially if it doesn't mean that you're, injuring yourself worse, right? Because you've done all the work. So yeah.
And like you said before we hit record, you love hearing these success stories as well. So thanks for contributing to helping out a lot of people. It means a lot.
Yeah. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks once again for listening and taking control of your rehab. If you are a runner and love learning through the podcast format, then go ahead and check out the Run Smarter podcast, hosted by me. I'll include the link along with all the other links mentioned today in the show notes. So open up your device, click on the show description, and all the links will be there waiting for you. Congratulations on paving your way forward towards an empowering, pain-free future. And remember, knowledge is power.